Item, SCP-034, the Obsidian Knife. Object Class, Safe. Special Containment Procedures. SCP-034 is to be kept in a secure room with access granted only to Level 4 personnel. SCP-034 itself will be kept in a locked case that is under 24-hour surveillance. When not in lab conditions, SCP-034's protective sheath cannot be removed under any circumstances. Any personnel in contact with SCP-034 must be placed under a 24-hour observation period until their identities can be confirmed. Description: SCP-034 is a primitive knife constructed out of pure obsidian. Tests reveal that SCP-034 is approximately 1,000 years old. Despite its crude method of construction and age, SCP-034 is still incredibly sharp and requires no maintenance to retain its edge. Expert analysis hypothesizes that SCP-034 may be of South American origin and that it may have been used in Native American rituals. Several accounts from Spanish conquistadors exploring the region support this hypothesis, with detailed writings on how priests would flay their victims alive with similar knives and wear their skin as a tribute to their gods. SCP-034 has the ability to allow its bearer to take on the appearance of another individual. If SCP-034 is used to cut a piece of flesh from a living individual, and that piece of flesh is placed against the skin of another individual, the second individual would take on not only the appearance but all physical characteristics of the first individual. Testing has shown that the minimum amount of skin required can be as little as 1 square centimeter. However, testing has also revealed that the amount of time the transformation lasts is directly proportional to the amount of flesh used. The ratio of time the transformation lasts to flesh used has been measured at approximately 1 hour for every square centimeter used. Once the time limit has passed, the affected individual will revert to their original form. Analysis of SCP-034's ability shows that its method of mimicking another individual is nearly flawless. Not only does SCP-034 change its bearer's physical appearance, but their actual physical attributes as well, including height, weight, muscle mass, bone density, hair growth, eyesight, strength, physical medical conditions, and even DNA. The only physical traits that are not carried over in the transformation process are wounds caused by SCP-034 itself. Subjects still retain their original personality and memories while transformed. Even though the process is nearly instantaneous, taking only a few seconds, human test subjects have described the transformation process as extremely painful. Subjects also may suffer psychological trauma depending on the extent of their physical transformation. Side effects are especially serious if the subject takes on the appearance of a person with differing gender or with wildly different physical attributes. However, in order to function properly, the individuals who have their flesh cut off by SCP-034 must still be biologically alive to maintain the transformation. Should the individual whose identity has been stolen expire, the effect immediately wears off. Further details may be found in Lab Report 034-A. Also, SCP-034 only appears to work on human subjects. Cross-species experiments with SCP-034 have resulted in data expunged. SCP-034 came into Foundation possession when an imposter disguised as Doctor attempted to infiltrate the site. The imposter was apprehended when authorities discovered the real Doctor tied up in his home with a large portion of his right arm skinned. Further details may be found in Post-Interrogation Report 2211. Lab Report 034-A. We've decided to test several scenarios dealing with the limits of SCP-034's capabilities. Test 1. Sample was taken from a deceased human cadaver and applied to subject D-452. There is no observable effect. Test 2. Sample was taken from D-532 and applied to D-452. D452 successfully mimics D532's appearance. Upon termination of D532, D452 immediately reverts back to the original form. Test 3. Sample was taken from D433 while under a medically induced coma and applied to subject D452. D452 successfully mimics D433's appearance and manages to maintain the transformation and consciousness. Test 4. Sample was taken from a brain-dead medical patient who suffered a massive brain hemorrhage and applied to D452. D452 successfully mimics the patient's appearance but immediately loses consciousness upon transformation. D452 does not regain consciousness until the transformation period expires. D452 retains no memory of the event. Test 5. Sample was taken from D625, who suffered a broken arm due to a confrontation with security staff. D452 successfully mimics D625's appearance, including the broken arm. D452's broken arm is remended when the transformation period expires. Test 6. Sample was taken from a terminally ill medical patient and applied to D452. The patient's terminal illness was caused by an inherent genetic defect. D452 successfully mimics the patient's appearance as well as the patient's illness. Both the terminally ill patient and D452 expire at the same time, after which D452 reverts back to the original form. Test 7. Sample was taken from a chimpanzee and applied to D466. D466 experiences rapid growth of hair across their entire body. There are otherwise no other significant physical or physiological changes. Body hair disappears when the transformation period expires. Test 8. Sample was taken from an Atlantic salmon and applied to D466. There is no observable effect. Test 9. Under O5 authorization, a sample taken from SCP is applied to D466. D466 exhibits extremely adverse reactions upon transformation and data expunged, resulting in significant damage to the testing environment, multiple injuries among test and security staff, and the death of D466. The testing of anomalous humanoids with SCP-034 is suspended indefinitely. Post-Interrogation Report 2211. As per standard operating procedure, we first attempted to interrogate the prisoner via non-violent and non-invasive means. However, when such methods proved ineffective, we began to implement conventional interrogation techniques. While partially successful, we deemed it necessary to use SCP, 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 and SCP. We managed to learn the following facts. The prisoner had extensive knowledge of the existence of the Foundation and its inner workings. The prisoner had extensive knowledge on other SCP-related agencies and groups. The prisoner was not acting under any official capacity from any government agency. The prisoner obtained SCP-034 and instructions on its operation from an unknown benefactor. The prisoner was given very specific instructions to infiltrate site and maintain his position until further notice. The prisoner had enough samples of Dr. to stay within site for days. Regrettably, the prisoner did not survive interrogation. Agent
Item, SCP-023. Object Class, Euclid. Special Containment Procedures. SCP-023 is to be contained in a walled-off inner section of 2 corridors at site data expunged, with at least 3 meters of space in each direction, and full stores at 3 of the 4 ends, in addition to the real door. Security cameras will be placed and maintained above all 4 doors. At all times, SCP-023's eye sockets are to be filled with spherical inserts made of hard rubber. Eye inserts must be replaced as they degrade. Degradation can be monitored by measuring the brightness of the burning effect as observed by security footage. Brightness greater than 12 candela requires that the inserts be replaced within 12 hours. Eye inserts are only to be replaced individually, and only after the sun has completely set. Personnel are not to look directly into eye sockets of SCP-023 at any time. Following Incident 02327, all reflective surfaces, including displays, monitors, and eyewear of any sort are not permitted within 30 meters of SCP-023's cell. This includes monitors linked to security cameras within its enclosure. Security personnel posted at checkpoints outside both corridors will enforce and adhere to this measure. Experimentation involving SCP-023 has been suspended indefinitely. Description: SCP-023 is a large, sexless shaggy canine, 1.5 meters at the shoulder, with black fur. Data expunged. See Incident Report 02326. Anytime an individual makes eye contact with SCP-023, either that person or a member of their immediate family will die exactly 1 year after eye contact is broken. Research into the method of selection is incomplete due to a moratorium on experiments, but the available data suggests that having a larger immediate family lessens the chance of the individual making eye contact themselves dying, and neither a pattern nor a preference in victim types have been found. This may indicate that SCP-023's victim is designated entirely at random, but it is unknown whether this selection occurs at the beginning or at the end of the 1-year time period. Attempts to terminate an individual who has made eye contact with SCP-023 and their entire immediate family before the 1-year time period has ended. Data expunged. Autopsies of individuals killed by SCP-023's effect show that, while outwardly appearing unharmed, their remains have been filled in with highly compacted ash, including but not limited to all organ systems and the circulatory system. Muscle tissue, bones, and brain tissue universally show signs of exposure to temperatures above. Data expunged. If not contained in a setting that at least superficially resembles a crossroads, SCP-023 will phase through walls to get to the nearest suitable location, incinerating all materials it passes through. SCP-023 was first brought to the Foundation's attention when it attacked a church in Data expunged while it was in session, killing Data expunged civilians directly and, redacted, as a result of eye contact. Following retrieval of SCP-023, Class B amnesiacs were administered to all witnesses and surviving victims. The incident was covered up as a case of arson. Addendum 023001. SCP-023 broke containment on Data expunged by passing through its cell wall. Incident 02301. SCP-023 was later discovered at the intersection of two corridors elsewhere on site. Data expunged. Agent Data expunged noted SCP-023's similarity to a redacted. Special Containment Procedures for SCP-023 updated. Assistant Researcher Data expunged issued a reprimand for negligence. Addendum 023002. SCP-023 has been responsible for the deaths of data-expunged personnel and data-expunged civilians since it was first brought into containment on 10/12/data-expunged. Addendum 023003. Request for reclassification to Keter pending. Addendum 023004. Due to both anomalies focusing on specific geographic spaces, their destructive capabilities, and canine appearance, it is possible that SCP-1111-1 may be a variant of the same phenomenon observed in SCP-023, or vice versa. Investigation into the origin of both anomalies is ongoing. Due to the inability to capture SCP-1111-1 for study, investigations are currently focused on SCP-023.
There are creatures of myth out there that you would want to stay away from. These creatures comes from the thing of nightmares and will truly haunt your dreams, having you wake up in a cold sweat. So with that in mind, here is the top 5 urban mythical creatures that will haunt your dreams. 5. The Chupacabra. Chupacabra, translated as goatsucker, is a reptile-like creature, said to have leathery or scaly greenish skin and sharp spines or quills running down its back. It is said to be approximately 3 to 4 feet high and stands and hops in a fashion similar to that of a kangaroo. The first reported attack occurred in March 1995 in Puerto Rico. 8 sheep were discovered dead, each with 3 puncture wounds in 3 chest area and completely drained of blood. So a vampire-type creature, that can sneak up behind you, without you knowing and suck all your blood out, definitely not something I would like to see in my dreams. 4. The Banshee. There are many varying descriptions of the Banshee. Sometimes she has long streaming hair and wears a gray cloak over a green dress, and her eyes are red from continual weeping. She may even be dressed in white with red hair and a ghastly complexion. Sometimes the Banshee assumes the form of some sweet-singing virgin of the family who died young, and has been given the mission by invisible powers to become the harbinger of coming doom to her mortal kindred. The Uabrian Banshee is thought to be named Abel and the ruler of 25 other Banshees who would always be at her attendance. It is possible that this possible story is the source of the idea that the wailing or numerous banshees signifies the death of a great person. When several banshees appear at once, it indicates the death of a great or holy person. The tale sometimes recounted that the woman, though called a fairy, was a ghost, often of a specified murdered woman, or a mother who died in childbirth. So hearing the wailing of the nearby banshee that no one else can hear is not my idea of a great night or day. 3. The Headless Horseman. The Headless Horseman is traditionally depicted as a man upon his horse missing his head. Depending on the legend, the horseman is either carrying his head, or missing his head altogether, and searching for it. The legend of the Headless Horseman begins in Sleepy Hollow, New York, during the American Revolutionary War. Tradition folklore holds that the horseman was a Hessian artilleryman who was killed during the Battle of White Plains, Indiana 1776. He was decapitated by an American cannonball, and the shattered remains of his head were left on the battlefield while his comrades hastily carried his body away. In myth, the horseman is known to ride along the streets looking out for any person that may be around. There he would chop off the head of his victim, where he would then put the severed head upon his own shoulders and disappear into the night, all while looking for his next victim. I don't know about you, but I am keen on keeping my head on my shoulders. Mind having a ghostly man keeping it on his. 2. The Wendigo. The Wendigo is a mythical cannibal monster or evil spirit native to the northern forests of the Atlantic coast and Great Lakes region of both the United States and Canada. The Wendigo may appear as a monster with some characteristics of a human, or as a spirit who has possessed a human being and may then become monstrous. It is historically associated with cannibalism, murder, insatiable greed, and the cultural taboos against such behaviors. In some traditions, humans who become overpowered by greed could turn into Wendigos. The myth thus served as a method of encouraging cooperation and moderation. Humans can also turn into Wendigos by being in contact with them for too long. The Wendigo was gaunt to the point of emaciation, its desiccated skin pulled tightly over its bones. With its bones pushing out against its skin, its complexion the ash gray of death, and its eyes pushed back deep into their sockets. The Wendigo looked like a gaunt skeleton recently disinterred from the grave. Yikes, definitely not a creature you would want to stalk you when alone in the forests. 1. The Thunderbird. The Thunderbird's a legendary creature in certain North American indigenous peoples' history and culture. It is considered a supernatural being of power and strength. It is especially important, and frequently depicted, in the art, songs and oral histories of many Pacific Northwest coast cultures, but is also found in various forms among some peoples of the American Southwest, East Coast of the United States, Great Lakes, and Great Plains. The Thunderbird controls the upper world while the underworld is controlled by the underwater panther or great horned serpent. The Thunderbird throws lightning at the underwater creatures and creates thunder by flapping its wings. Thunderbirds in tradition are commonly depicted as having an X-shape appearance. Well, seeing the Thunderbird and the underwater creatures in a battle would be glorious, but being anywhere near the battle is not a place I would want to be. Think, all that lightning being thrown around is sure you will be struck and dead.
Hey guys, and welcome to another Urban Reads and Stories video. Today's video is all about those terrifying urban legends we have all heard of and hate to happen to us. This is 5 terrifying urban legends. For years, kids living in and around Staten Island raised goosebumps by relating the tale of Cropsey, a boogeyman who lived in the woods and made a nocturnal habit of disemboweling children. Parents no doubt eased their kids' fears by telling them no such monster existed. But he did. In 1987, Andre Rand was put on trial and convicted for a child abduction. Rand, it turned out, may have been connected to a rash of child disappearances in the 1970s. He had once worked at Willowbrook, a defunct mental institution. While he denies involvement in other cases, it's clear Rand's activities had a heavy influence in the word-of-mouth stories that followed. Vintage video games have long trade stories about a coin-operated arcade game circa early 1980s Portland that had strange effects on its players. The game, titled Polybius, was alleged to have prompted feelings of disorientation, amnesia, game addiction, and even suicide. The machine's cabinet was said to be painted entirely black, and it was rumored that stern-looking men would sometimes visit arcades to collect information from the machine before disappearing. Was it a CIA experiment spun up from MK-Ultra, the psychoactive drug study conducted on unsuspecting subjects? While the entire story doesn't hold up to scrutiny, individual pieces are actually based in fact. Brian Dunning, host of Skeptiad podcast, did some investigative work and found that a 12-year-old named Brian Morrow had become sickened during a 28-hour marathon video game contest in Portland in 1981. Just a few days later, Portland area arcades were raided by federal agents, who seized cabinets that were being used for gambling. Coupled with the existence of a real arcade game called Polyplay, these memories seem to amalgamate into the Polybius legend. You stagger into the bathroom at 3 a.m. to relieve yourself. Groggy you with sleep, you lift the lid and position yourself over the toilet. You hear splashing. Turning on the light, you see a rat looking back at you from the bowl. You're never the same again. Urban legends about animals in sewers have been a staple of scary stories, particularly the one about baby alligators being flushed down toilets and then growing to adult size in waste channels. Most often told in New York. But finding a rodent in your toilet, inches from very vulnerable areas of your body, is particular kind of domestic terror, and one that happens to be possible. Drain plumbing for toilets is typically 3 inches in diameter or more, plenty of space for a rat to climb up. The animals are attracted to sewage lines due to undigested food in feces and can travel through pipes before emerging through an opening and into your bathroom. And yes, rats can be somewhat testy when they complete their journey. One aquatic rodent bit the rump of a female victim in Petersburg, Virginia in 1999. In Seattle, the issue is common enough that public officials have given advice on what to do in case you encounter one: close the lid and flush. If you lived in or around Virginia in the 1970s, you were probably exposed to the story of the Bunny Man. In the tale, an escaped mental patient takes to gutting bunnies and hanging them from a bridge underpass. Later, the maniac is said to have graduated to gutting and hanging teens in a similar manner. Locals were cautioned to never be caught near the underpass, which is now known to most people as Bunny Man Bridge, on Halloween night. This story likely spawned from the very real presence of a roving madman in the area. In October 1970, a couple reported seeing a man dressed in a wild suit and wearing bunny ears who began yelling at them that they were on private land. To punctuate his point, he threw a hatchet at their windscreen, apparently shattering it. There was a second sighting of Bunny Man 2 weeks later, when a security guard spotted a hatchet-wielding man chipping away at a porch railing. Police tried, unsuccessfully, to locate then man. While he didn't disembowel anyone, the thought of an adult wielding both a hatchet and a pair of rabbit ears somehow manages to be just as disturbing. Imagine finding yourself outside and alone in the dark on a residential street. You hear footsteps approaching. Suddenly, a man with a misshapen face appears. You run, terrified beyond words. You spread the story of the man with no face throughout Pennsylvania. Charlie, No Face was actually a man named Ray Robinson, and he was no figment of anyone's imagination. Born in 1910, Robinson was disfigured as the result of an electrical accident at the age of 8. He touched active wires, which effectively maimed him. Knowing his appearance could be disconcerting, Robinson took to taking strolls after dark. He often walked a path along Route 351 in Beaver County. While his inevitably led to spreading stories about a boogeyman haunting the town. He died in 85.
Item, SCP-026. Object Class, Euclid. Special Containment Procedures, SCP-026 is to remain securely locked and boarded up at all times when there is no research ongoing. Alarms are set to alert the Foundation in case of entry by civilians or other agencies. Description: SCP-026 is a 3-story public school building built in data expunged. It has two wings connected to a central foyer. It was declared condemned in data expunge after it was found the floor plan didn't match up to the building's blueprints. See interview log 02601. It came to the Foundation's attention after several disappearances in the area were linked to visits to the abandoned building. The building demonstrates spatial anomalies. The internal space is much greater than the external of the building would allow. Hallways display variable length, while stairways have differing number of steps going up or down. The number of rooms of the hallways changes each time they are counted. Attempts at trying to reach the far ends of the hallways have met with failure so far. Entrance located at fire escapes located at the end of the hallways lead to doors approximately midway down the length of the halls. Edit, see Note 026A. There is considerable graffiti on the interior walls of the school. Most appears typical, including gang signs, names, and street art. However, the graffiti fades and reappears, changing location. Writing on chalkboards and bulletin boards changes in a similar fashion. Subjects typically found range from standard school subjects, mathematics, literature, biology, to more esoteric subjects, such as quantum entanglement, data expunged, and eugenics. One researcher reported one board detailing information about SCP data expunged, but photographic evidence showed only a blank slate. See Note 026B. The phrase "the children used to sing" has appeared multiple times in various places throughout the building, but there is currently no explanation for its significance. A number of unconscious subjects have been found in the building, mostly of high school age, ranging from 12 to 18. They are dressed in accordance to the school's dress code, circa data expunged. Several have been identified as former students or faculty of the school who disappeared after the school shut down, in at least one case, more than 10 years after the closure. It is currently unknown how they were transported back into SCP-026. See Note 026C. All attempts to wake the subjects while inside the building have failed. On being removed from the grounds of SCP-026, the subjects wake abruptly. They experience a period of confusion, before dying from extremely rapid dehydration, followed by advanced decomposition. No useful intelligence has been recovered from the subjects to date. The inability to wake subjects extends to those who fall asleep on the grounds of SCP-026. though the rapid dehydration only seems to affect those who have been found on the grounds of the school. See Incident Report 02612. Note 026A. Robotic exploration and video feeds have shown that the apparent spatial anomalies are caused by changes in the perceptions of observers, rather than actual spatial phenomena. For this reason, SCP-026 does not require the expertise of Mobile Task Force Row 8 roadside picnickers at this time. Update: further exploration has shown that some spatial phenomena do occur. See the exploration logs for more details. Note 026b. The contents of notepads, books, and pieces of paper have been observed to disappear, only to reappear on surfaces within SCP-026. New writings have appeared, mostly drawn from graffiti or textbooks. Caution should be exercised in bringing documents onto the grounds of SCP-026. Note 026c. Several Class D personnel exposed to SCP-026 have disappeared from Foundation control, only to reappear inside the anomalous building. The subjects in question had previously complained of dreams identical to those experienced by Agent Malek. Update: see Interview Log 02608. Incident Report 02612. During a routine security check of SCP-026, Agent Malek was found unconscious by his partner, Agent Jones, in the main foyer. Initial attempts at rousing Agent Malek were ineffective, so he was moved for transportation to Site Data Expunged. Upon leaving the grounds of SCP-026, he woke abruptly in a state of agitation. When questioned, he revealed that he had been dreaming of a classroom setting. This dream has been consistent throughout all subjects who have fallen asleep within the grounds of SCP-026.
Just before dawn, on the outskirts of New York Harbor, a small sloop sailed listlessly into the bay. The ship had no crew, no lights, and a deck covered in blood. It presented a mystery to the local police, who set their detectives on the case, which led to a manhunt up the east coast of the United States in pursuit of a phantom. The police may have had a description, a name, but they had no idea of the monster they would find at the end of the trail. More than a phantom, they were chasing a legend, a man who would later become whispered about in taverns as the last pirate of New York. Albert W. Hicks, also known as Elias W. Hicks, William Johnson, John Hicks, and Pirate Hicks, was a triple murderer, and one of the last people executed for piracy in the United States. Cultural historian Rich Cohen places him as the first New York City legendary gangster figure, a bridge between the piracy of old and rise of a new gangster nation. According to Hicks' testimony, he was born in 1820 in Foster, Rhode Island. His father was a farmer who had 7 sons, of whom Hicks was the second youngest. He was known to be headstrong and a fighter. He never attended school and worked on the farm until age 15, when he ran away to Norwich, Connecticut, where he began a life of crime. Arrested for theft, he was put into jail. Biographer Rich Cohen suggests it wouldn't have been uncommon for a teenage runaway to be buggered by older inmates. Hicks escaped a number of times, but he was reapprehended and given increasingly severe sentences, including a year in solitary where Hicks said he went a little crazy. He swore vengeance against the whole human race. The account given by Hicks for the next 20 years is murder and mayhem on the high seas, the goldfields of California, throughout South America, Mexico, the South Pacific, and the Atlantic Trade Triangle. Ship mutinies and highway robberies were his main occupation. It is possible that Hicks killed hundreds of people. He and an accomplice typically killed their victims and stayed on the move, spending money on alcohol, prostitutes, and fine clothes until it ran out. He was a known raconteur, and when his confessions were published, the New York Times raised some doubt about their accuracy, but modern biographer Rich Cohen said there was evidence to support at least some of the stories. Hicks eventually washed up in New York City, at the age of 40, with a newly married wife who knew nothing of his criminal past and a young child to support. Needing money for his family, he turned to the skills he knew best. Hicks hired on as a deckhand with the oyster sloop A.E. Johnson out of New York City, which he knew to be carrying a large amount of cash for buying oysters in Virginia to be transported back to New York. There were 4 men on the boat, including Captain George H. Burr, brothers Oliver and Smith Watts, and Hicks. It was nighttime as the boat neared the Narrows. Captain Burr and Oliver retired to their quarters to sleep. Smith had night duty and Hicks joined him on deck, politely taking a turn on the wheel. Hicks saw something and pointed it out to Smith, asking what it was. Smith didn't see anything. Hicks said, "Look again." Smith turned his back. Hicks grabbed a sea axe and struck a blow to the back of Smith's head, felling him to the deck. Hearing the commotion, Oliver Watts stuck his neck out through the cabin hatchway. Hicks struck again, decapitating Watts. Hicks recalled that the body slowly sagged downward and the head rolled onto the deck, now sprayed with the blood of 2 brothers. Hicks carried the bloodied axe into Captain Burr's cabin, who was by now alert. The captain was a tall, strong man and the ensuing fight lasted a while, with Burr almost strangling Hicks to death. Eventually, Hicks managed to slash the captain with the axe, slicing off half his face, including an eyeball and nose left hanging on the axe blade. Exhausted from the struggle of killing Burr, Hicks searched the living quarters for loot. When Hicks returned onto the deck, he saw a movement and was shocked to see Smith on his feet moving towards him. He believed it might be an apparition. Hicks forced the injured man overboard, but Smith grasped a rail and hung on with a death grip. Hicks swung the axe and chopped off his fingers, which fell onto the deck. The rest of Smith slipped into the water. Hicks threw the other bodies and the axe overboard. The A.E. Johnson had been running unattended and struck another ship, the schooner J.R. Mather, breaking the Johnson's mainmast and bringing down her rigging. Hicks set out to sink the ship, with the evidence of the killings, by drilling a handful of holes through the keel. He then took the money, about $230, and the possessions of the murdered crew, and abandoned ship in a yawl, rowing for shore and landing about daybreak next to a farmer's field on Staten Island just above Fort Richmond, Battery Weed. Believing that he would not be caught, he made his way back home to Manhattan, stopping at saloons merrily drinking and making a spectacle of himself. When the abandoned but still afloat A.E. Johnson was discovered the next day by the Coast Guard, they found the deck and cabin bathed in blood, including inexplicably a set of severed fingers. The city was shocked by the gruesome scene and intrigued by the mystery of what happened. Police detectives could see that a yawl was missing and began a search for it. After a few days, a local boy led them to where it had been abandoned in some rushes. They began following a chain of witnesses who had seen a strange man carrying a large heavy sea bag. The detectives followed witness sightings all the way back to an apartment in Manhattan. Hicks learned the police were on his trail through newspaper reports and fled the city. Detectives had by now determined Hicks' identity, and they continued to follow a chain of witnesses who remembered a large man with a wife and small child taking trains and boats northward. When police found the last witness to see him, a cabbie who took Hicks to a boarding home outside Providence, Rhode Island, they surrounded the house in the middle of the night and took him captive in bed without a fight. They found in his possession Captain Burr's watch, several money bags, and a daguerreotype belonging to Watts, among other damning evidence. When the abandoned but still afloat A.E. Johnson was discovered the next day by the Coast Guard, They found the deck and cabin bathed in blood, including inexplicably a set of severed fingers. The city was shocked by the gruesome scene and intrigued by the mystery of what happened. Police detectives could see that a yawl was missing and began a search for it. After a few days, a local boy led them to where it had been abandoned in some rushes. They began following a chain of witnesses who had seen a strange man carrying a large heavy sea bag. The detectives followed witness sightings all the way back to an apartment in Manhattan. Hicks learned the police were on his trail through newspaper reports and fled the city. Detectives had by now determined Hicks' identity, and they continued to follow a chain of witnesses who remembered a large man with a wife and small child taking trains and boats northward. When police found the last witness to see him, a cabbie who took Hicks to a boarding home outside Providence, Rhode Island, they surrounded the house in the middle of the night and took him captive in bed without a fight. They found in his possession Captain Burr's watch, several money bags, and a daguerreotype belonging to Watts, among other damning evidence. Hicks soon became a legend in the New York underworld, with the help of showman P.T. Barnum. Barnum had met Hicks in prison and made a deal that would allow Barnum to take a death mask while he was still alive. In return, Barnum would give Hicks a new set of clothes, the electric blue suit he wore for the execution. Barnum used the casting to create a full-size wax statue of Hicks wearing the same clothes as when he committed the murders. The wax likeness was displayed for 10 years and seen by millions of visitors before it melted in a museum fire. Biographer Rich Cohen argues that Hicks originated a gangster clothing fashion that can still be seen in art and real life. The Hicks look of a Kossuth hat pulled low over one eye, long-tailed monkey jacket, and pumped footwear were displayed at the Barnum Wax Figure Museum where millions saw a very bad but handsome man. This style passed from gangster to gangster and through generations as a sort of badge of association with legends of the past, eventually reaching Hollywood films of the 1930s and broader culture to the present. Hicks was hanged on Friday the 13th. There is some speculation Hicks originated or helped solidify a superstition of the day's ill luck, though there are other theories. His name became a slang gambling phrase, meaning 6 on a pair of dice, rhymes with Hicks. Henry Sherman Backus, an itinerant composer of murder ballads that romanticized crimes, dedicated a ballad titled Hicks the Pirate sung to the traditional Irish tune The Rose Tree. Irish singer-songwriter Vincent Cross recorded a modern take on the 1860 ballad for his album The Life and Times of James the Rooster Corcoran, 2020, titled Albert W. Hicks. 8-9. The execution of Albert Hicks is dramatized in Chapter 18 of McKinley Cantor's Pulitzer Prize-winning novel Andersonville, 1955. Hicks was portrayed as a wax figure in the Twilight Zone episode The New Exhibit. In the show, wax figures in a museum come to life and commit murders when they learn their exhibit is to be shut down. Hicks is accurately dressed in a Kossuth hat and carries a sea axe. He is portrayed by the American actor, Bob Mitchell. Billy the Kid, born Henry McCarty, also known by the pseudonym William H. Bonney, was an Irish-American outlaw and gunfighter of the American Old West who killed 8 men before he was shot and killed at the age of 21. He also fought in New Mexico's Lincoln County War, during which he allegedly committed 3 murders. McCarty was orphaned at the age of 15. His first arrest for stealing food, at the age of 16, in late 1975. 10 days later, he robbed a Chinese laundry and was again arrested, but escaped shortly afterward. He fled from New Mexico Territory into neighboring Arizona Territory, making him both an outlaw and a federal fugitive. In 1877, McCarty began to refer to himself as William H. Bonney. 2 different versions of a wanted poster dated September 23, 1875, refer him to as William Wright, better known as Billy the Kid. After murdering a blacksmith during an altercation in August 1877, McCarty became a wanted man in Arizona and returned to New Mexico, where he joined a group of cattle rustlers. He became well known in the region when he joined the Regulators and took part in the Lincoln County War of 1978. McCarty and 2 other regulators were later charged with killing 3 men, including Lincoln County Sheriff William J. Brady and one of his deputies. McCarty's notoriety grew in December 1880 when the Las Vegas Gazette in Las Vegas, New Mexico, and the Sun in New York City carried stories about his crimes. Sheriff Pat Garrett captured McCarty later that month. In April 1881, McCarty was tried and convicted of Brady's murder and was sentenced to hang in May of that year. He escaped from jail on April 28, killing 2 more sheriff's deputies in the process and evading capture for more than 2 months. Garrett shot and killed McCarty, by then 21, in Fort Sumner on July 14, 1881. During the following decades, legends grew that McCarty had survived, and a number of men claimed to be him. Billy the Kid remains one of the most notorious figures from the era, whose life and likeness have been frequently dramatized in Western popular culture. Henry McCarty was born to parents of Irish Catholic ancestry, Catherine and Patrick McCarty, in New York City. While his birth year has been confirmed as 1859, the exact date has been disputed as either September 17 or November 23 of that year. A letter from an official of St. Peter's Church in the Manhattan states it is in possession of records showing McCarty was baptized there on September 28, 1863. Following the death of her husband Patrick, Catherine McCarty and her sons moved to Indianapolis, Indiana, where she met William Henry Harrison Antrim. The McCarty family moved from Antrim to Wichita, Kansas, in 1870. After moving again a few years later, Catherine married Antrim on March 1, 1873, at the First Presbyterian Church in Santa Fe, New Mexico City Territory. McCarty and his brother Joseph were witnesses to the ceremony. Shortly afterward, the family moved from the Santa Fe to Silver City, New Mexico, and Joseph McCarty began using the name, Joseph Antrim. Shortly before McCarty's mother, Catherine, died of tuberculosis, then called consumption, on September 16, 1874, McCarty's stepfather, William Antrim, abandoned the family, leaving both McCarty boys orphans. McCarty was 15 years old when his mother died. Sarah Brown, the owner of a boarding house, gave him room and board in exchange for work. On September 16, 1875, McCarty was caught stealing food. 10 days later, McCarty and George Schaefer robbed a Chinese laundry, stealing clothing and 2 pistols. McCarty was charged with theft and was jailed. He escaped 2 days later and became a fugitive, as reported in the Silver City Herald the next day, the first story published about him. McCarty located his stepfather and stayed with him until Antrim threw him out. McCarty stole clothing and guns from him. It was the last time the two saw each other. After leaving Antrim, McCarty traveled to southeastern Arizona Territory, where he worked as a ranch hand and gambled his wages in nearby gaming houses. In 1876, he was hired as a ranch hand by well-known Henry Hooker. During this time, McCarty became acquainted with John R. Mackey, a Scottish-born criminal and former U.S. cavalry private who, following his discharge, remained near the U.S. Army post at Camp Grant. The two men soon began stealing horses from local soldiers. McCarty became known as Kid Antrim because of his youth, slight build, clean-shaven appearance, and personality. On August 17, 1877, McCarty was at a saloon in the village of Bonita when he got into an argument with Francis P. Windy Cahill, a blacksmith who reportedly had bullied McCarty, in turn called Cahill a sons of a bitch, whereupon Cahill threw McCarty to the floor and the two struggled for McCarty's revolver. McCarty shot and mortally wounded Cahill. A witness said McCarty has no choice, he had to use his equalizer. Cahill died the following day. McCarty fled but returned a few days later and was apprehended by Miles Wood, the local justice of the peace. McCarty was detained and held in the Camp Grant guardhouse but escaped before law enforcement could arrive. McCarty stole a horse and fled Arizona Territory for New Mexico Territory, but Apaches took the horse from him, leaving him to walk many miles to the nearest settlement. At Fort Stanton in the Pecos Valley, McCarty, starving and near death, went to the home of a friend and Seven Rivers Warriors gang member John Jones, whose mother Barbara nursed him back to health. After regaining his health, McCarty went to Apache Tajo, a former Army post, where he joined a band of rustlers who raided herds owned by cattle magnate John Chisholm in Lincoln County. After McCarty was spotted in Silver City, his involvement with the gang was mentioned in local newspapers. At some point in 1877, McCarty began to refer to himself by the name William H. Bonney. After returning to New Mexico, McCarty worked as a cowboy for English businessman and rancher John Henry Tunstall, near the Rio Felix, a tributary of the Rio Grande, in Lincoln County. Tunstall and his business partner and lawyer Alexander Lawrence Murphy, James Dolan, and John Riley. The three men had wielded an economic and political hold over Lincoln County since the early 1970s, due in part to their ownership of a beef contract with nearby Fort Stanton and a well-patronized dry goods store in the town of Lincoln. By February 1878, McCarty owed £8,000 to Dolan, who obtained a court order and asked Lincoln County Sheriff William J. Brady to attack nearly $40,000 worth of Tunstall's property and livestock. Tunstall put Bonney in charge of non-prime horses and told him to relocate them to his ranch for safekeeping. Meanwhile, Sheriff Brady assembled a large posse to seize Tunstall's cattle. On February 18, 1878, Tunstall learned of the posse's presence on his land and rose out to intervene. During the encounter, one member of the posse shot Tunstall in the chest, knocking him off his horse. Another posse member took at Tunstall's gun and killed him with a shot to the back of his head. Tunstall's mother ignited the conflict between the two factions that became known as the Lincoln County War. After Tunstall was killed, McCarty and Dick Brewer swore affidavits against Brady and those in his posse, and obtained murder warrants from Lincoln County Justice of the Peace John B. Wilson.